Everybody, could I invite you please to take a seat?
I've got them. Thank you.
We were at one point cautioned about timekeeping and how things very quickly slip. But actually, I think everybody's been really, what's the word? I don't want to use good bad terms. Really helpful in supporting us in keeping time. So thank you very much for that. And we're now moving into the final keynote today.
Thank you very much. It's a great privilege to welcome Professor Modood here today. He's a Professor of Sociology, Politics and Public Policy at Bristol University and the founding director of the University Research Centre for the Study of Ethnicity and Citizenship. He's held over 40 grants and consultancies in the UK, Europe and the US, and has over 35 authored or co-edited books and reports, and over 200 articles or chapters in political philosophy, sociology and public policy. He's the co-founding editor of the international journal Ethnicities. He's highly committed to public engagement, and he's a regular contributor to media and policy debates. His work is frequently cited by policymakers and practitioners, and on several occasions has influenced policy. He has been advisor to the Muslim Council of Britain and has served on the DFES Race, Education and Employment Forum, the Commission on the Future of Multi-Ethnic Britain, the IPPR Commission on National Security, the National Equality Panel, and the Commission on Religion and Belief in British Public Life. He's rushed down to Bristol today, fortunately, to talk to us on religious identity and secularism as a diversity and equality issue. A very warm welcome to you.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for that warm welcome. In fact, thank you for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to address you. Even though I think that perhaps what I'm about to say may not directly, yes, we should get our PowerPoint on as well, at least get the title up, yeah, may not have been obvious that it fits into your conference. So when I was invited, I was asked to do something, and I said, well, instead of doing that, can I do this? I hope by the end of my talk, you will think it fits into your conference. I think it fits into your conference, of course, otherwise I wouldn't be here. So this is the title. So I'm going to kind of explain why is it that I want to give you a talk on religion and secularism when your conference is on decolonization and anti-racism. So I'm going to justify being here as well as, obviously, to give some content to what I think is an important issue. So let's begin. How do we get to religion from anti-racism? Well, I think there are a number of steps. So let's think of anti-racism as anti-discrimination, a very simple idea that surely no one will have difficulties understanding or quarrel with. When I say anti-racism is anti-discrimination, I don't necessarily mean that anti-discrimination exhausts the idea of anti-racism. I mean that we can all understand that anti-racism will include some concept or other of anti-discrimination. And anti-discrimination here is short for negative behavior that would include things like stereotyping, name-calling, harassment, and so on. So that's where we might begin. Well, I think that anti-racism, at least my understanding of anti-racism, goes well beyond that first point, because it includes, or should include, what I'm here calling positive identity affirmation in number 2. And I offer 3 ways to explain what I mean by positive identity affirmation as part of anti-racism. I'm not saying these 3 ways are exhaustive. There can be other ways. There can be ways that cross across the 3 and so on. But just to give you some idea of how I'm getting to religion from anti-racism. So my first idea of a positive identity affirmation is turning a negative into a positive. And I think the best example we have of this is the concept of black or blackness, positive blackness, and in particular the ways that this was done by African Americans in the United States, but then certainly it's been very influential in Britain, in South Africa, and I think in a number of other places, but it was very much started and led as an idea, as a movement by African Americans who said to the rest of American society, to white Americans, you call us black and you think that's something to be ashamed of because it's about inferiority, about backwardness. But actually, we are black and we are proud to be black. And we have a history that we want to retrieve, to recover, to publicize, to make you understand. And it's a history of oppression, but also of struggle and resistance and achievement. And we're going to go on to achieve more. So it's owning the negative identity, but making it a positive identity. Turning to the second way this might be done, is where a group that's being racialized, i.e. given a certain racial identity by people powerful enough to make that identity stick on that group, that's being racialized and it refuses that identity in favor of an ethnic identity. And again, we can illustrate this with an example from the United States where people called Red Indians, people called Indians, racialized as, oh, you are a group of red people and we think you're Indians because we thought we were looking for India. Turn round and say, we're not Red Indians, we don't even know who the Red Indians are that you're talking about. We're Native Americans, or we're First Nations, or by our own particular national names, we are Sioux, or Mohican, or Cheyenne, and so on. And I think something similar happened in Britain as well, because in the 1970s and 80s, a particular idea became quite popular amongst anti-racist activists, and in fact in British social science, the idea that if you weren't white, you were black. And it didn't really work for very long, but it was prevalent for a while, I'd say in the 1970s and 80s. But some of the people who were being given, and you know, if you like, positively being given this anti-racist identity, turned round and said, we're not white, you're right about that, but we're not black either. We are Asian, or we're Indian, or Pakistanis. So they refused a racialized identity for an ethnic identity. So instead of turning black into a positive identity, they just said, well, that's someone else's identity. It's not ours, and we have identities of our own, which would you be good enough to recognize if we're talking about equality rather than you telling us who we are. Then the third way, and you'll see now we are getting to religion, is where a racialized identity, like black or even Asian, because in many ways Asian is a, you know, for South Asians is a racialized identity, where a racialized identity is refused in preference for a religious identity. And actually that's been quite a feature of British ethnic minority formations, of British ethnic minority developments, in particular groups coming from South Asia, like Sikhs. They were really the first to do it. If some of you know of or can remember the turban campaigns that Sikhs fought to get employers to accept they're wearing turbans as part of professional uniforms, like bus conductors, train drivers, policemen, and so on. But there are other groups as well, like Hindus, and most prominently today, of course, Muslims. So that then does get us from anti-racism to religion. I hope you can see why I think religion should be part of it. And once we recognize that religion sits in the domain of anti-racism and decolonization, then given the present context, the ism that we're most interested in, they're not the only one, but the one I'll focus on, is Islamophobia. Now, I understand Islamophobia, well, it can be understood in a number of different ways. So I'll go through these three. The first way is where actually Muslims are treated as a racial group, or perhaps I should say a quasi-racial group. Now, I take it for granted that by racial group we don't mean a biology. You know, it can include a biology, and of course that is the classical Western racist ideas, but it's not the only one. Jews have been understood to be a racial group, but we also know they're a religious community. Or you could say, as I think actually historically makes good sense to say, that Jews are an ethnic group who have a religion called Judaism, rather than Jews are a group of people defined by a religion. I think actually historically and sociologically it's the other way around. Jews are a people who have a religion and whose religion can be used to racialize the group, like, you know, to call them all Christ killers and so on. So I think something very, very similar is happening and has been happening to Muslims in Western Europe in particular, but now, of course, with the Trump campaign and presidency in the United States, we see that actually the United States becoming very central to this development as well, where Muslims are understood to be a group of people. They're othered, negatively othered, in exactly the same way that other groups can be othered, like black or Jewish. And we then can also see how there can be a dynamic that I've already described, where a racialized group reacts to its racialized identity by asserting a positive identity. And Muslims can do it in a number of ways, but what's really interesting is the prevalence of rejecting a racialized identity by affirming a religious community identity. So not all Muslims by any means, but the overwhelming majority of Muslims react to their racialization by asserting that they're Muslims. So that's actually a bit like the first case. Well, no, it's probably more like the second and third cases, really, where people say, you think we are, terrorists or foreigners or fundamentalists and so on, but actually we are something that we want to tell you about, or we want to be respected as. We have an identity of our own. We're not simply what you're projecting us to be. So that really fits very much into the dynamic that I've already described. But I know that when we talk about Islamophobia, other people have other kinds of understandings and so on, so I'll quickly touch on those as well. For some people who could be called Islamophobic, actually, for them the important thing is that Islam is a false religion. We don't get that view so much in Europe, because Europe's not sufficiently bothered about true and false religions. But in the United States, we get it very strongly. So a lot of Islamophobia in the United States is about who is the true God. Is it Jesus or is it Allah? And we get statements from right-wing Islamophobes about Muslims. The problem with Muslims is they worship the false God, or there's something wrong with their religion. I'm not going to be touching on that. I've just mentioned that just to push it out the way. It's not what I'm centered on. For me, it's relevant only insofar as, to go back to a previous example, Judaism is relevant in the racializing of Jews. So it's only because it has the effect on Muslims is it important what people think about Islam. Otherwise, I'm not interested in theological arguments about Islam, whether Islam's the true religion or the false religion or whatever. I turn then to the third, secularism. Now actually this is can be more a source of uncritical attitudes to religion, and therefore potential source of Islamophobia in Europe, in our own social science disciplines, and in the progressive left. Let me illustrate what I mean. So you'll recognize, I'm sure, the quotes from Karl Marx about religion being a veil of tears and opium of the masses and so on. Now I think I don't have a view on that, by which I mean I don't have to have a view on that. And anything I don't have to have a view on, I try not to have a view on, because I think it's important to have what you might call conceptual economy, conceptual rigor, so that you don't clutter your argument with incidentals which you then have to defend. I don't have to defend a view on this, so I don't hold a view on this. So if someone actually does think, actually all religion is opium of the masses and so on, fine, okay, if that's your view. But that doesn't diminish the social and political importance of Islamophobia. As long as it doesn't diminish that, you can hold any view you hold on one. 2 is similar, but actually 2 is a little bit more problematic. I can't fully ignore 2. I don't have a comprehensive view about religion and reason, but I do have a view where it cuts across my understanding of Islamophobia. So for instance, if someone interpreted 2, as people have done, as Karl Marx did for instance, in terms of something like a false consciousness, that Islam or any religion is a false consciousness, that could be a problem for my argument about religion and equality, because false consciousness then could constitute what Charles Taylor calls misrecognition, where you don't recognize and respect the group in terms of their own identity, but you redescribe and recategorize are people in terms of what you think they really are, some kind of true ontology, then I do have a problem with that kind of reductive, materialistic ontology that says, well, actually, you think you're a Muslim, you're not really, you're just a false proletariat. Your consciousness has gone all wrong. If you had the right consciousness, you'd realize Islam was incidental to you and to your emancipation. Well, obviously, most Muslims would find that an extremely patronizing and offensive view. And so that kind of identity denial, if number 2 is interpreted as identity denial, then I do have an objection to it. But otherwise, if it can sit alongside in what one might call happy coexistence with treating religious people in terms of equality and respect, then I have no problem with it. But I must say that when I entered this field in the late 1980s, this kind of identity denial was very prevalent. And I think one of the struggles that Muslims have fought in countries like Britain is exactly against this materialistic, usually class-oriented or sometimes race-oriented identity denial. So let me say something more about secularism insofar as it's kind of relevant to the kind of equality that I want to talk about here. And I'll get to it by, I think, a couple of slides like this. So this is, in a way, perhaps just summing up how I've got to questions of religious diversity and equality, from racial equality, and I hold them jointly together within a larger concept of multiculturalism, which I won't fully spell out at the moment, but I'll say a little bit about. But one objection could be that someone could say, but you are conflating 2 different kinds of identities here. That when egalitarians, or a certain kind of egalitarian, talk about equality and identity, they're talking about identities of fate, identities that are not chosen. We don't choose to be black because we don't choose our parents. We don't choose in the main to be male or female, though who knows with technologies and so on. But anyway, our current understanding of humanity is we don't choose to be male or female, and virtually everybody is male or female. And they say, well, that's what equality should be focused on. That people should not be held to be inferior or to be treated negatively in a secondary way because of something that is not their responsibility. And they say religion does not fall into that category because people choose their religion in the way that people don't choose their race. So I have to say something about that possible objection. And I think the objection is rather overstated, completely overstated. Because when we say that we don't choose to be black because we don't choose our parents, well, Muslims don't choose to be Muslims in the sense they don't choose their parents either. People are born into a society where Islam and Muslims are perceived and treated in a certain kind of way, just as women might be treated in a certain kind of way, black people may be treated in a certain kind of way. These things are not chosen. So that you can be born into a Muslim family and born into a certain society and treated in a certain kind of way, in exactly the same way as the examples of race and gender. Of course, as you become an adult, then there's a sense in which you do affirm some interpretation or other of your religion, or you walk away from it, or you become antagonistic, or whatever. So of course, there's some element of agency in religious identity. But I want to say that the kind of identities we, the people in this room, are interested in also have a parallel element of agency. Take something like Black History Month, something I'm sure we're all familiar with, in October in Britain, to make up for all the deficit of lack of Black history in our usual school, college and university curricula. Now, I think you'd all agree that it's possible to have somebody who, at one level of description, we would all agree is Black, and they would say that of themselves, namely that they're of African descent, and they could turn around and say, what is Black History Month to do with me? I don't want to know about it. I'm British. I'm European. I'm American. Tell me about my history. Don't tell me about Africa. Don't tell me what Africans did. Now, we may think that that person, well, we may not agree with that person. My point is simply, it's logical. There's a logical space for that position, because there is a sense in which multicultural identities have to be owned, unlike racial identities which are stuck upon people from someone more powerful saying, you're Black, you're brown, you're yellow, you're Indian, we're white. That's racial identities. But multicultural identities are a challenge to racial identities because they have this element of subjectivity, of intersubjectivity, and of agency. People own their own identities. People rise up to being Black, to being Muslim, to being Indian, and so on. So where is this contrast between race and religion that I was pointing to? I think the contrast is very limited. And so just in the same way that most of us, I take it in this room, would be opposed to institutional policies that claimed that equality could be delivered through a colour blindness. Because, how do we even identify that there is discrimination if we don't look for it? If we say, oh, we're blind, everybody, doesn't matter what colour they are and what not, everybody is the same. So I think I draw the same implication in relation to religion, that we can't be religion blind if we're serious about religion and equality. So I'll turn now to say something about equality, because that does a lot of work in my understanding of multiculturalism. So I'm not going to offer a full description of multiculturalism. I'm happy to discuss that with you. But certainly, two concepts of equality idea is central to my idea of multiculturalism. So this is equality concept one. Again, you all recognize it because it's about equal rights, it's about non-discrimination, it's about treating everybody the same. We couldn't do without this idea. It's a brilliant idea, one of our best ideas. And in relation to religion, it would take the logic of, if Christians are allowed to have X, let's say morning worship in schools, why can't Muslims? If they're allowed this, why isn't this group allowed? There should be sameness of treatment. But note, I say here, that there are two ways of interpreting this. There's what I call equalizing downwards, which is, and some people in all seriousness say this is the right view to take. They say, yes, you're absolutely right. Christians are privileged in British schools. Muslims are therefore disadvantaged, treated as second-class citizens. You know what? We're going to raise you up to the level of first-class citizens by abolishing whatever it is that Christians are allowed to do. So that's bringing the Christians down to the level of Muslims. Now Muslims have no complaint. You thought you were treated badly? No, you're not. Christians are going to be treated like this from now on as well. It's a bit like some women who complain that men are paid more, and the boss turns around and says, oh, don't worry, all men are going to be paid £5,000 less from next month. So it's not really a very satisfactory way of pursuing equality. But a lot of secularists think this is the way. I don't. I prefer the other, which is the equalizing upwards, where we give Muslims and others, Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists and so on, the same provision as currently enjoyed by Christians. Now, it doesn't have to be identical provisions, and there may be some provisions that don't fit that model, which fit that other model, but I want to say that we can't have equality in relation to religion without 1B. We may sometimes have to have 1A, but we also need 1B, and in fact, I think more often than not, we need 1B. In addition to 1B, we also need 2. So this is my second concept of equality. When I say mine, I don't mean distinctive to me. The person I would say that I've learned most from in relation to this concept is Charles Taylor. So this is in addition to concept 1, which is very important, because a lot of multiculturalists are attacked by saying, oh, you've given up on universal rights, you've given up on universalism and so on. No, this is in addition, not replacing 1. And this is then equality as respect for difference, which can require differential treatment, not sameness, but differential treatment, as the important thing is to focus on a group's needs. As well as some practical questions on what provision is generally available. And so the example I have here is that we know that Christians, they used to once, but now in Britain, Christians have no dietary needs that are met at school. Fish is still served on Friday, but nobody in the school, even most of the teachers, have any idea why that is the case. But, that's just how it's done. So, supposing Muslims and Jews say, could we have some kosher and halal meals at school? And the local authority or the head teacher or the school governors turn around and say, oh no, why? We'd be privileging you. We don't do this with any other religion. We don't do this with Christians. Well, but Christians aren't asking for any. Muslims and Jews have religious obligations and requirements that Christians don't. So we have to attend to the distinctive needs. That just as we do in multiculturalism in general, have to attend to distinctive cultural needs. We don't judge one religion by the standards of another. We say, we could say, well, actually, that's not a need that you have. You could have a dialogue like that. But I think, if it comes to halal and kosher, that dialogue would be lost, because it's quite clear that Jews and Muslims do have such requirements. And so I think the second concept of equality is very important in multiculturalism generally and in relation to religion as well. But I can see for some secularists, this is now beginning to look like, my God, how much religion are we going to have to live with around here? We thought we'd managed to push it to the margins, and now, in the name of multiculturalism, it's all coming back to bite us. Because people think that religion is a private matter. Well, actually, it doesn't require much reflection to think it's not. We have an established church. Our head of state is the supreme governor of that church. We have bishops, 26 bishops in the House of Lords, our second chamber in the legislature, only because they're bishops. They may be very bright, intelligent people that should be in the House of Lords, but the reason that they're there is because they're bishops. So the idea that religion is a private matter is actually not a satisfactory understanding of secularism. And so very, very quickly, here are 3 different understandings of secularism. So there's basically the kind of First Amendment secularism of the United States, the wall of separation between church and state. There shall be no establishment. And that was done in order to allow all religious faiths to flourish, so that none would be the state religion. Anyway, whatever we may think of that, it's not what we have in this country. In fact, not what we have in any European country. But in one European country, we have another kind of secularism, the French variety of laïcité. Unlike the first one, which says religion and politics should be kept apart and neither should be controlling the other, the Republican view is they should be kept apart, but the state should be controlling religion. So the state should determine the boundaries of religion, what is and is not permitted. And so we have all these hijab wars and niqab wars and burkini wars going on in the French Republic, because the Republic wants to tell Muslims how to dress. And they say, what's wrong with that? Surely that's good Republican principles. Why are you defying our Constitution? We're all Republicans. You should dress like the way the state tells you to dress. Well, luckily for us, France is an exception in Western Europe. And we have, in Britain and in most of northwestern Europe, we have what I call moderate secularism, which I'll very, very quickly go through. I mean, all these things could be discussed in much more detail, but just to give you some idea of what I mean by moderate secularism and where I think religious equality has to be worked at, institutional religious equality has to be worked at. This is the institutional political context. So my understanding is religion and politics are seen to be mutually autonomous, which is not the same thing as mutual exclusion, as in the United States, because autonomy does not mean exclusion, but nor is it the French one-sided control. Secondly, that religion is regarded as a public good. By public good, I mean it can also be a public bad. The important thing is that it's a public good or bad, and it's not just a private good, because loads of people could hold the opium of the masses view, but still say, well, we understand it's private good, you know, people in times of bereavement and so on. But no, moderate secularism goes well beyond that. Recognizes that church can, well, I'll leave number 3 out, because it's not necessary to make the point that I'm making. But what is necessary is that recognition that it may be legitimate for the state to be involved in bringing out the public good element of organized religion and in protecting the public good from the dangers that organized religion can pose. So, we recognize that, like for instance, in the French laïcité view, they would definitely accept the second. It's, of course, it is the duty of the state to prevent any harmful effects of religion on the rest of society, on the health of the Republic. But I'm saying that the relationship between the state and organized religion is not just a negative relationship of regulating the possible negative effects of religion. And of course, I'm acknowledging that religion can have negative effects. I mean, for goodness sake, the world's full of them, and European history is certainly full of them. So my view isn't that, oh, religion's a great thing, let's all embrace it. I've got no view on that whatsoever. People can embrace it, not embrace it. As I said before, all views that I don't need to have a view on, I'm agnostic on. Why carry hostages to fortune? My view is simply that there are public goods that religion can deliver. If they're running good schools, that's a public good. If they're helping to inculcate, let's say, practices of honesty, of care for others, of respect for others, of good citizenship, then that's a public good. That should be supported. My argument isn't that religion's the only thing that can do that. Not at all. All I'm saying is, if religion is having that effect, then that's a public good, which we should recognize. And then finally, this is quite an important point, because I'm assuming that all the first 4 points, and indeed the equality in general that I'm recommending in relation to religion, is all done within liberal democratic constitutionalism. So if I was recommending a policy, I don't know, halal meat at schools or whatever, and someone could show me that breached liberal democratic constitutional norms, if they could really show me that, I would withdraw my recommendation, my religious demand or whatever it was. I wouldn't withdraw it on the argument that religion is the opium of the masses. I wouldn't withdraw it on the basis of religion is a private matter, but I would withdraw it if it was shown to violate individual rights, to cut across democracy, or to be unconstitutional. But I think the kind of religious equality or religion within multiculturalism that I'm briefly putting before you doesn't do that. But I'm very willing to listen to any objections. So I'm actually coming quite close to the conclusion, despite your giving me this extra time, Chris. I hope that helps to explain what I then mean by religion and secularism. And what I'd like to do, just in the last few sentences, is just to underline what's been implicit, and it's probably quite clear, but I think it's worth underlining, and that is that I'm talking about religion in a very broad sociological way. So it's not just about beliefs, because, religion is what people do, not just what they believe. What people do in front of you, what people want to do with you, what people want schools' policies to reflect, what they might want local government policies to reflect, what they might want democratic deliberation to take note of, and so on. And they can be argued against. I don't regard religion as just like a trump in the sense that someone says, it's my religion, and we just say, oh, well, in that case, everything's fine. But it does have some normative claim. If someone said, you can't ask me to take my turban off because it's my religion, we do have to attend to that. I don't regard that as a complete, as it were, argument finisher, a clincher, but it is important. We do regard issues of religion and conscience as having that normative significance that must be attended to. I ought to also say, that I meant to say much earlier, is that when I'm talking about religion, I'm including, as our legal concepts do, both in the United Kingdom and in the European Union, the concept of religion or belief, meaning, and the or belief can include humanism. It can include, secularisms. And I'd be very happy, in fact more than happy, I think, for instance, atheism should be included in religious education classes at school. People should know that people hold these views and why they hold these views. Children should learn about them and come to explore those arguments. So everything that I've been saying about religion so far is about religion in this broad sense, which goes well beyond beliefs, but also goes well beyond what we might call traditional religions, to include matters of deep convictions about how the world is and should be, which is more than just politics, more than just ethics, but it's kind of an encompassing worldview, like humanism is. Which means that religion is about social organization, and it makes demands on social organization and social structures, including the law, state resources, like, how the state should spend its education budget, and it's about what happens within institutions and the effects on society. It's certainly about how we live together as a multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious society. And that's really what I'm working on, what I'm kind of trying to develop, and what I'd like to introduce into this conference, this idea of a kind of multiculturalizing secularism. I say secularism, some people say, oh, how can you talk about secularism? You're giving so much space to religion. But as I've tried to argue, albeit quite briefly, that the kind of political secularism that we actually live in, as opposed to sometimes have false beliefs about, is a secularism in which religion does have some public place. Perhaps a limited place, but it does have a public place, and is given certain forms of institutional and national recognition. And I think that we should take those institutional and national recognitions and multiculturalize them rather than abolish them. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Tariq. Tariq, in my view, has taken a very complex subject and cut through it in an incredibly interesting and speculative way. And I'm sure there are quite a number of questions that you'd like to ask him. So we've got about 10 minutes for questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Professor. We decided together. My question is relating this idea of religious identity and equality to, if you want to relate it to education and the idea of decolonizing education. Do you think subjects, like for example here in the UK, they have a subject called RE, religious education. Do you think such subjects can bring this kind of equality where children learn more than one religion? They are learning, for example, about Islam, Christianity, and the basics and the belief and principles of these. And yes, for example, if no, how can we make such subjects really work towards these kinds of religious and equality? And on the other way around, in other countries, like very pure Muslim countries, like where I came from, for example, I'm from a country which have over about 2.5 million Omani citizens, but they also have about 2 million expatriates. Those expatriates are from different religious backgrounds. Does this mean that we need such kinds, and also those kinds of countries, do we need such kinds of syllabuses where our children, even our Muslim children, are, for example, being given something about other religions, so they can, as a way just of letting them know about the other religions, to be more open-minded, more accepting for the other kinds of religions and things like this? I don't know if you got my point.
Yeah, I think I did. And so the answer to your first question is yes, I do think that the kinds of things I'm talking about should be included in a school subject called religious education. I actually think that subject should be statutory up to a certain age, let's say 15 or 16. I think it should teach about religion in general, but you can't just teach about religion in general. You do have to look at specific religions, and it may not be possible to look at all possible religions, so there has to be some selection, and there'll be different criteria of selection, but obviously relevant to contemporary society, I would say, would be one of the most important criteria. And I think that everybody of all faiths and of none should attend those classes and should be taught together. So these aren't separate streams, like, this is the Christian class, that's the Muslim class, and so on. Everybody taught together. And I think that what they should be taught is not just about doctrines. Muslims believe this, but Christians believe something else, Hindus don't believe that. I think they need to learn about religion as a world phenomenon, as a social, political, cultural, historical phenomena. They should learn about the harms that religion has done over time in places and is doing today in various parts of the world, as well as what religious traditions have contributed to the development of relations between people, to the development of concepts of justice and human rights, of decency and ethics and so on. So it would be a very broad subject, but I would call it religious education. Some people call it religious literacy. I don't mind that term, as long as it's not just doctrines focused. Because, for instance, I think we should have Islamophobia, and anti-Semitism, and how religion of people who are not white connect with racism. I think that should be included in the subject I'm talking about. And should this also be done in Muslim societies like Oman? Yes, I mean, I can't see why it shouldn't be. I'm involved in a research project with colleagues in Qatar, and I mean, there's so much inequality in Qatar that at a demographic level, you couldn't ask for a more multicultural, multi-ethnic place. But in terms of rights and status, I mean, it's so anti-multiculturalist. Someone had a hand up, so I don't know whether you want to come in directly then.
In response to your response to it, completely behind it, at the beginning of my professional career, I was an RE teacher, and that's going back 20 years now. And I would say that what Tariq is talking about is exactly what we were trained to do here in the UK. But what I would say is that anyone coming to a UK school where religious education is taught, and the parents indeed have to be open-minded to know that what we're teaching are critical pedagogies, and that it's not doctrine that is taught, it's looking at belief, values and systems from a whole range of perspectives. And the difficulty comes, having taught in a couple of faith schools myself, where the parents say, no, you must teach that this one is right, and that is not the role of religious education in the UK. It's that critical pedagogy.
Yeah, thank you for that. If I could just add, and people may not agree with me here, but while I entirely agree with what you've said about religious education, I also think there should be space for what, in olden days we used to call religious instruction in school as well. Now, how one deals with that is complicated and will be highly contextual. But I think it's a little bit like the example I gave about halal and kosher meals. We can imagine a situation where it's not so common in Britain, but it does exist in certain parts of Britain, but it's actually more common in some other European countries, like Germany, where schools teach Christianity in a religious instruction way. Now, I'm not against that, but it's not religious education, and I do want a compulsory religious education. So I don't want one or the other. They can both be possible. But if, say, as is much more common in many parts of England, parents and schools say, we don't offer Christian religious instruction. Okay, fine, if everyone goes with that. But what if some minority faiths do want religious instruction? This is what I meant when I said there's a parallel with kosher and halal. And so my view on this, and this is the bit that some people may not agree with, is that actually minorities should be able to make their own claims, and their own claims should be evaluated in their own terms, and not simply in terms of, is this what we do with the majority? So Christians don't get any religious instruction, and they're not asking for any, so why are Muslims asking for some? I think that is the wrong kind of argument. The argument should be, well, are Muslims genuinely asking for this? What are they asking for? How many Muslims? Which Muslims? When can we fit it in? And I'm not committed to the view that it's got to be within the school curriculum. It may be that we fit it in at lunchtime or after school or whatever. I think we have to be a bit more flexible. I just don't think we can just say, oh, that's for parents and community. The school has no responsibility here, because the school is part of the community.
Lady at the back has her hand up too.
just a point of information that the space that we're asking about is compulsory in English schools up until 15, 16. Most schools do it as a GCSE because time is very tight in the curriculum when you're at that stage in school. So if the kids have got to do a lesson in it, most schools are keen to get enough qualification out of it. So there's a space of leverage, if you like, in those syllabuses to look like. I'm not saying that, again, including the, as far as I know, it includes both.
Well, but you know, we've had a lot of free schools and so on. I'm sure you guys know a lot more about it than I do. And it's not a requirement in those schools, and they're now becoming a very substantial part of the secondary school sector. So when I say I think it should be a statutory subject, I mean a statutory subject in all kinds of schools, including, I would say, in state-funded church schools and state-funded Muslim schools and so on. Just as we would expect the same about English and mathematics and so on.
It's fair about the definition system, I agree. I think it's still in the majority. The spaces are there, contested.
Gentlemen.
Yeah, hi. Great presentation, Professor. I think the question's really around, I guess, we're talking about decolonizing teacher education. Religion, the Church of England has quite a significant part to play in the role of colonization across the world. So I guess my question is really around appreciating there is space in the curriculum currently. How can we reconcile then the fact that we're in a conference talking about decolonizing teacher education, but potentially talking about religious instruction or religious education as a mechanism to help do that when we recognise and understand its role in the colonisation process historically?
Well, you know, if we took that argument, I'm not saying you said this, but if you like, it was implicit in your question that one answer to your question could be, oh, religion did a lot of awful things in relation to empire and colonialism, therefore religion should not be taught, or religion should only be taught in a kind of as answering a charge sheet of historical guilt.
It should definitely be taught, that's my
okay. I just think if we took that view, you know, there'd be very little left to teach. Science, engineering, economics, politics, which of these things was not involved in colonialism? You know, some of the most people aren't fully aware of this, but if we look at the British rule over India, as we all know, it started off with the East India Company, and the East India Company became extremely rapacious and so on, is famous for that. But there was a period of time when some of the you know, the leaders of that company and people with, you know, large responsibility for what was happening in India, they took a relatively multiculturalist view. Not multiculturalist in terms of you know, citizenship and democracy and things like that, but in terms of respecting the cultures and religions of India. You know, in their own way. We might say some of it was very patronizing and orientalizing and so on, but they genuinely took that view. And the break with that view came around the 1820s, and the people who broke from that were liberal rationalists. People like John Stuart Mill and his father, James Mill. Macaulay, who insisted that English had to be the only language taught in British schools in India, because they had this view of what you might call rational enlightenment. The progress was to do with reason, religion was to do with backwardness, and in fact they had a historical analysis for why they thought India was so backward, even though when they arrived, India was actually had a higher standard of living and a higher GDP than Western Europe and so on. But anyway, obviously India didn't have the scientific revolution and so on. So by the early 19th century, it was quite clear that Western Europe had made a qualitative leap forward relative to other places in the world. And their analysis was, it's to do with religion. Religion has kept these benighted people backward. So that view began around the 1820s, but I'm not against liberalism because James Mill thought that Indians were backward. I mean, we have to criticize those views, but we have to bring out what is of value in liberalism and to extricate liberalism from its historical mistakes. And there's been loads of prominent Western philosophers that have justified slavery, or certainly justified racial superiority, racial inferiority. You know, Kant, Hume, Hegel, lots of them. But they're still great philosophers. So we can't just say, you have a historical charge sheet against you, so we don't read you or teach you or anything. I'd rather that charge sheet was part of the curriculum, part of the subject.
I think we are at a stage where we now can see clearly the past, the problem that religion caused, and now we can talk about it, and we can now see that there's a different direction that we can move. And so the whole aspect about how we can live together in terms of peace, in harmony, to kind of respect each other and things like that, I think has to be the focus of what we should be aiming at. And I think maybe that is where all the different religions maybe have to come together and come out with all the good things that we can help move society forward. And that's the way I'm kind of thinking and seeing about it, because there's so much of negative of the past, and if we want to go into that, we're not going to get anywhere.
Well, I agree with you that religions have to come together, because we obviously want peace and harmony and brotherhood and sisterhood. And I agree with you that we have to do that by bringing out the good that they have, which may be good that they have in common. Though there may be also some distinctive goods as well. But I think the way you started your statement is likely to not help you to reach that end, or help us to reach that end. Because there was a kind of counterproductive, patronizing bit about, we have now come to see how bad religion has been. Well, I think we need to show religious people a bit more respect than that. I mean, the mass murderers of history have been radical secularists like Stalin and Mao. And even Hitler, even though he used Christianity in a certain symbolic way, he certainly wasn't guided by Christianity. And we know that a lot of the Protestant churches were anti-Nazis and risked their lives resisting Hitler. A lot of them didn't as well, but some of them did, and some of them helped Jewish people to escape from the clutches of the Nazis and so on. So I don't think we can begin with the view that religion is in the main got an ugly history. I think too many people see value in their religion. And we have to begin with where people are. And if you remember my very first slide about positive identities, we must help people to develop positive identities, especially under conditions of oppression and inferiorization and colonialism. So a lot of the South, meaning the southern part of the globe, is very religious. So we can't go to them and say, well, yeah, but religion's a bad thing. Can we help you to find what's good in your religion, because we mainly see the negative? I think we need to have we need a little bit more humility than that.
We're running over time.
Maybe started very well, but I don't mean to kind of create any difficulty. Maybe I didn't point out exactly what I wanted to say properly. So
okay.
Thank you. We're running over time, so I'm going to take one last question from George.
Thank you very much. I've been thinking of things about the whole idea of intellectual independence, right? and scholar activism. So when you talk about, there are certain things you don't want to engage because you have to defend. Then it raises the question about at what point it becomes a privilege for certain bodies, given that we are in the spirit of decolonization, that words do matter, discourses do matter, that we cannot simply say there are certain things we don't want to touch. And I just want your reflection on that.
Yeah, thank you, George. I do hold the view that I want a certain intellectual parsimony and intellectual economy because of what I was saying about if you have too many views and they're not necessary to your core argumentation, then they can trip you up because people will attack the incidental part and you'll say, yes, but what about the core point I was making? About they either want to criticize or what they find easy to criticize. The boundary line for me between that, i.e. what I must work hard to argue for and what I'm willing to pass over in silence, that distinction is not the distinction between the academy and society or a public space. That's not the distinction. So, as Christopher very nicely read out at the beginning, it is true that I am highly committed to public engagement on exactly these kinds of issues, and not just as an aspiration, but I do have a little bit of track record. So I'm certainly not arguing for a scholarly retreat, for some kind of scholastic ivory tower, not at all. I was making a completely different kind of point. I see other people end up not being able to make their most important point effectively because they carry too many other views all at the same time. Or perhaps that's a better way to put it, that there should be a time and place for different arguments. So if you want to get one argument right, let's focus on that, and then in another context you might want to look at something totally different. But in any case, if your worry was that I was recommending some kind of scholastic retreat, no, I very emphatically say I'm arguing for exactly the opposite of that.
Sadly, we're out of time, and I know that discussion could go on for a very long time, and I'm sure it might well do over lunch. Can I just say I was totally fascinated by your talk, thank you, and the questions and answers. Thank you so much for that, and I'm sure you all agree with me. Can we give it a big round?
We have a break now of 3/4 of an hour for lunch. If any of you at this point want to make some form of reflection or put a sticky note on the boards, can I just remind you that those are available for you as well? Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that very much indeed.
Thank you.
It's not many times in working to have engagement.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was trying to do.
Sorry, I have one other
boundary of
thing
the
to say.
agenda.
I apologise.
Yes, yes, very good.
Thank you.
Particularly in the way we worked yesterday, we could have spent 24 hours on it, but
Yes.
I'm sure people will go.
Regarding the lunch,
We had some very important
apparently the vegetarian meals
selecting our head of
are
school.
over on the left-hand side at the back.
Oh, I see. Well,
And all
inevitably.
chicken, anything that has chicken in it, chicken is halal.
Good, good. And I can stay for the final session. Yes, I've told Fran. She kind of tentatively put me on the program saying it's time. And I told her, yes, I can make it.
Really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Very nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Yes, I get there. I'm sorry I couldn't be here yesterday. I was just telling Christopher, we had some head of school appointment to make yesterday. I noticed that Fran had tentatively put me down for the final session to brackets if time is available. So I said to Fran yesterday or Thursday, I will make time available so I can stay. Yes, I will. Yes, I'm sorry if I misunderstood you, Emmanuel.
Yes, I'm sorry, but maybe I didn't present it well, or whatever. But it's also to do with the idea that in this current day and age, we are kind of understanding this opportunity of you talking to me about this. I've never had that opportunity.
Yeah, so we just need a little bit of humility when we approach people. See, I don't know about you, to me, my religious identity is not so sensitive. I mean, I'm a Muslim, and it's much more politically central than it is faith central. But a lot of my family is very religious. I couldn't possibly take the view with them that they're in some kind of in the grip of something negative that I've freed myself from, and I will help them to discover something good in the disease in their mind.
No, I don't think that's the way my direction was. My direction is so much to do with now that we're kind of learning so much about things, you know, of which religion is, so that the positive, you know, have to be kind of be guided. So it's not so much the difficulty that, you know, this is with done, I'm just thinking that we have to be looking forward.
But you know, quite a lot
you
of
have read more than I made.
progressives have taken.
Yes.
Excuse me.